W.
Welcome back to Cohort W. I'm your Season 3 host, CW3 Susie Albert, and today is an unconventional interview. This interview I'm particularly excited about, and I'm so grateful for Steve Leonard for holding a candid and, by my assessment, necessary leadership conversation. So today we're going to discuss the use of anger and how it can lead to humor, wisdom, mentorship, and meaningful change. Steve is a retired O6, an accomplished cartoonist and writer, and a professor at the University of Kansas School of Business. I recognize that this is not the standard Cohort W interview, and this is my favorite thing about it. He is an exceptional leader that has been shaped by warrants and who ultimately shaped hundreds of thousands of people with his ideas. Soldiers, leaders, changed processes with his anger, his humor, and his exceptional leadership. So let's hear from Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Leonard. I am a retired Army strategist, a retired colonel, currently a faculty member at the University of Kansas School of Business.
This morning, was reading an article that you had sent me about your experience working with warrant officers. I'm going to include that in the notes of this episode. But I guess I first wanted to ask you, how have you been shaped as a colonel by warrant officers?
So, I have always told people that I was raised by wolves in the wild, meaning that my first mentors were either non-commissioned officers or warrant officers. And a lot of that was driven by the fact I came from a fairly blue-collar background. I grew up in a household where, you didn't just hire somebody to do something. You figured out how to do it, whether it was pour concrete or dig ditches or build something or wire something. You figured it out on your own. You rolled up your sleeves, you got your hands dirty, and you did it. And so as a young officer, my warrants specifically were the ones and my NCOs were the ones I've related with the most. And the article I shared was the lessons I drew on the warrant side from that. And I spent probably at least once a week would go out to lunch with my warrants, and we would just sit and talk. And it was really professional development for me. These were all maintenance technicians or supply technicians. And we're talking late 80s, early 90s, to give you some perspective on, just how crotchety they were. They were a very specific breed back then. And the one that I probably learned the most from was a CW4 named Chuck Hunley. And Chuck was a Vietnam veteran who he had that way of, he would always tell people what they needed to know, not necessarily what they wanted to hear. And that was something that I carried with me the rest of my life. And I took great pride when I would have a 4-star say, I can always trust you to tell me what I need to know and not what I want to hear. Well, that came from Chuck. And Chuck was the kind of guy that when we were dumping money into something, he would say, hey, look, this is a waste of money, and I'll explain it to you why. And we'd be better off fielding a new crane in the engineer brigade, for example, because the existing cranes were in Vietnam. They were pieces of shit then. They're pieces of shit now. You can't get them to run. We just need to move on. Well, geez, Chief, they're on everybody's MTO. What are we going to do? Well, that's for you to solve that one. But I'm just telling you, they're impossible to maintain, and they always will be. And that attitude permeated my early years to the point where I probably had that warrant streak in me throughout the rest of my career, that I would tell people what they needed to hear, whether they wanted to hear it or not, and then stand by what it was. I didn't feel the political pull to, hey, I've just got to fit in and I got to be like everybody else. No, I'm gonna tell you what you want to hear or what you need to hear, and I have a moral obligation to do so as a leader. I felt good about carrying that, and it also gave me what I would tell people was it gave me a completely different relationship with risk. That and I think I mentioned that I was because of that association and that mentoring, I became that person who would prefer to beg forgiveness than ask permission in a lot of cases. Right. I would accept the risk at my own level, and okay, if I got my ass chewed for it, I'm okay with that, as long as I'm doing the right thing and I'm trying to do something good for the organization or for the institution. Not everybody feels that way. And that was something that I believe strongly enough in, that if you go back to the 2008 edition of FM 3.0, Field Manual 3.0, the Capstone Operations Manual, I actually wrote a little piece in there. It's just a sentence, and I still quote that sentence to this day, is that risk is a potent catalyst that fuels opportunity. The whole idea, and as somebody who teaches mission commands, you can appreciate this, risk is part of what we do. And on the mission command side, we had a caveat, and I don't know if we still do anymore because it's been a while since I looked at ADP 6.0, that, talked about taking prudent risk. And I would fight that and say, because nobody uses prudent in a sentence. When was the last time nobody uses it? So that sentence signals people to not take risk. So it achieves the opposite. It's like, well, we'll exercise disciplined initiative. Well, who the hell exercises undisciplined initiative? Nobody. Well, nobody that you want to exercise initiative. So
I was going to say,
you can take the disciplined initiative out of that. I want people willing to take risk and take initiative, and I'll empower them to do so. That comes from that warrant officer influence that, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And not to make a long story long, but I remember, and I've done this throughout my career, but I remember as a lieutenant, they were trying to, I was a shop officer at the time in a maintenance shop, and we were having a problem with replacing hydraulic cylinders on, God, I don't know what type of equipment it was, whether it was a wrecker, whether it was a crane. And the supply system no longer they hit zero balance, contract had elapsed. There were no cylinders to be had. And these cylinders were items that were mandatory turn in, would go back to depot for repair. And we knew that the minute we turned in those cylinders, we'd never see one again for at least 6 months, which meant we'd be buying 6 months of downtime on whatever that piece of equipment that was. And so we're having one of these lunches where it's just the techs and me, and I'm talking about this, and old Chuck, he says, well, Stevie, there's a solution, but we have to do it after the shop closes. Like, what's that? And he said, well, it's a depot level repairable, which means we're not authorized to do the repair. So when the shop closes, let's you and me go down to the auto zone and let's go buy some parts and then let's fix it.
Okay.
And we did. We sat in the shop that night and we took this this hydraulic cylinder apart. And he said, really, all you're talking about is it's a metal tube with some seals in it and some gaskets, and that's it. It's not impossible to fix. And I think we probably spent $10, fixed this thing, put it back on the piece of equipment, had it out the next day, and nobody was the wiser. Mm-hmm. But it was one of those things where somebody finally says, "Where did you get that cylinder?" Like, we repaired it. You're not authorized to repair it. Well, we did.
Right.
Oh, you're in trouble. I'm like, okay, bring it. Let's do it.
Right.
Because, I exercised initiative. I accepted the risk. And, hey, let's ask the engineer brigade if they're angry because that thing works. No, we're not angry. We're happy. Okay, there. You want to fire me for it? You want to chew my ass? Go ahead. But we did the right thing. And I continued to do those kinds of things over the years where some things would pop up and they'd say, well, you're not authorized to do it at your level. Well, there's exceptions to policy for a reason, but let's not even worry about that. Let's just do it. And
you are really reminding me of something that I described, and earlier in the season, what we were discussing was like, what do we think makes a good warrant officer? And the way that I kind of developed the concept of that is that you need to be growth-minded, so constantly in pursuit of your subject matter expertise. You need to have influence. So it's like the advisement that is rooted in good decision-making. It's rooted in good values, and you need to be industriousness, which is the opposite of helplessness. And I feel like what you're sort of posing and the way that I'm hearing you describe Mission Command is the substitution of the term disciplined initiative with the term industriousness. Do
Absolutely.
you have, or can you be a tool to fix this thing? And does it require to be a problem solver? Does it always require, I don't mean to say this in such an ugly way, but like daddy's permission? Like, do you need to get permission all the time to just do things that make sense? And that instead of being a fear-based leader, can you be an industrious leader? And I like that what you were discussing is being an honest broker, and that thing takes courage. It takes courage to not ask permission and be like, hey, I need top cover on this, but like own your power as and we're all seeking subject matter expertise as an advisor to the commander, as somebody who is supposed to be a representative of an entire discipline within the Army or entire MOS or systems capabilities, et cetera. I see that in the warrant officer cohort. What do you think informs that ability to kind of be courageous and to be honest, even when people don't want to hear it, or to be problem solvers? What factors do you think allow for warrant officers to maybe embody that and I would say at a greater rate than some other folks?
Well, I think at their level, a warrant officer has to be able to do that, because that is something that we invest in. But what stymies that ability, what sometimes gets in the way of doing that are, who they work for. And so as a leader, I think it's incumbent upon you to underwrite risk. Saying, and I've always tried to do this, which is my subordinates, whether they were officers, whether they were warrants, whether they were NCOs, all underwrite the risk. And so they knew we could have an honest dialogue about what they were doing. They didn't have to ask permission. And if things went wrong, okay, I got it. I'm your overhead cover. I will absorb this as long as you're not doing something monumentally stupid. I will underwrite the risk, and whatever ass chewing that comes down stops at me, and I will take that, and I will gladly take that. I don't care. That's what I exist for. And then, so as a leader, you create a culture where there's trust that those people below you know that they can do those kinds of things, that they can take those risks, and they don't have to worry about those being career-ending risks for something minor. And that's a culture that we talk about within Mission Command, that we should have that. But that's one of the reasons why Mission Command is an ideal that we always have to strive towards, because we still have a lot of people who are risk averse, who are, like you said, that they feel like they have to ask Mother May I every time they do something. They don't feel comfortable with, they don't have that comfortable relationship with risk that allows them to do that. They're either risk averse, they're afraid of accepting responsibility for what they have the authority to do. There's some disconnect there. And as leaders, I think the best thing that we can do is to empower those underneath us, is to say, hey, the risk stops at me. I accept the risk. You do this, I'll underwrite it. And I want you to have the freedom to be industrious, to find those new solutions. And that actually plays out really well if you allow it to. Here's my experience over almost 30 years is that you have at the lower levels, so at the point of execution where you've got the warrant officers doing things and the NCOs doing things, that works. And at the upper levels, you have a comfort with this where general officers, senior leaders are usually fairly comfortable. Somewhere in between is where you find a delta where things start to fall apart. Where I think what happens is you make captain, then you make major, then you start worrying, God, am I going to make it all the way? I can't screw up. I've got to fall in line with everybody. Somewhere in there, a lot of people go sideways, and they lose that relationship with risk, and they don't extend trust down. And so there's that huge disconnect, which is crazy, because if the senior leaders get it, because they got there by thinking like that the right way, and then the people down here at the other end of the spectrum, they get it. It's like, how do you fix what's in between? And that's the sweet spot right there. If you can teach people that, hey, Mission command isn't just an ideal. It is a way of operating. And you just have to do it. You can't just say, God, I aspire to, exercise risk or accept risk. No, you will accept risk. You're going to get comfortable with it. And we're going to stop punishing people for accepting risk. We're going to stop saying, hey, that whole culture of, you made a mistake, so that's going to cost you on your OER.
Right.
That stuff has to stop. That is not productive. There are plenty of people who suck at what they do that you don't have to separate out Susie because she made one mistake. You say, Susie, that's a terrible mistake. Okay, chuck it up to lesson learned. Let's move on, rather than end your career. There are plenty of people who they can't do the PT tests. They can't meet standards. They cause other problems. Those people. Save your bad evaluations for them. Give the good evaluations to the people who are doing the right things for the right reasons.
Right. Yeah, I think that there's this uniqueness in the warrant experience, and I think you've really challenged what I think I've sort of held as a belief for a while, that our isolation, us being such a small cohort, and I expect when I'm a warrant and I show up to a new unit, I very much expect that I am going to be one of one. That I'll have a section, but I'm going to be the only warrant. What that means is that I'm isolated because I'm not friends with the officers, right? Those aren't my friends. I'm not friends with the NCOs or the junior enlisted. Those aren't my friends. And very infrequently do I sort of find myself with another warrant. And if so, they represent a totally different capability. And in that isolation, and we've been talking to a couple W1s in the last couple of episodes about how they experience that isolation. I think there's a freedom in that isolation to pursue, number one, your own self-development and growth, because it's not guided or shepherded by a social dynamic. It's not influenced by a social dynamic. And so that sort of, in my experience, has allowed for me to possess a greater authenticity and also inform my own growth more easily, because no one is saying, hey, you're changing, or hey, we decided we weren't going to do that or talk that way or act that way or whatever. So I've had this freedom to change. And now I hear you saying that your warrant used their isolation to not only give them that freedom and that courage and that, risk acceptance, but to include others in development.
So when I teach, and I teach leadership, I teach strategy, a few other things, but a core tenet that I teach all my students, whether they're graduate students or undergraduate students, is the concept, Aristotle's concept of phronesis, which is the essence of what a warrant officer is. It is in the ancient Greek world, it was your ability to merge study and practical knowledge into a form of unique wisdom that just permeated what everything did. And it was like the highest level of learning that you could achieve. Nowhere else do we do that outside the Warrant Officer Corps, where it's the heavy study in your field, the deep practical experience, the incredible technical knowledge. When you fuse those things together, you achieve something that nobody else has, which is that practical wisdom, and that practical wisdom is what we value. But by the time you're a W3 or a W4 or a W5, people then look at you almost like you're a mythical figure.
Sure.
Because you are, even if you're alone, you are this. You, Susie, are the old man on the mountaintop that we go to for wisdom, and ask you the question: how do we deal with this? And I have almost never seen a senior leader that wouldn't, in a room, defer to the warrant officer in the room, because the warrant officer was going to tell you what you needed to know. And that was a knowledge that was informed with just, decades of experience and practical knowledge. And it was just something special. And so that's where, but almost by default, if the other people in the room are paying attention, that warrant officer is teaching. Right. And that is something you don't get with any other cohort within our personnel system. You are alone, yeah. So figure yourself, you're like a monk within your specialty. You're developing, and you develop yourselves, and you develop others within your cohort. But you become something unique that you've achieved this what Aristotle called phronesis. You've developed that over years, and it puts you in a completely different position. So yeah, you're alone. Can you handle the isolation? Can you deal with all that? And if you're successful at dealing with all that, then you just become that mythical being that everybody defers to for a reason. Or people who don't defer to them do that at their own risk.
One of the things that is elusive for some warrant officers is once they accumulate that practical wisdom, once there's that development of that practical wisdom, and this is something that I really drew from that article you wrote about what you learned from Chuck Hunley, is that he sort of talks about a mechanism to send that into the world and to create change with that practical wisdom. Is like, how do you tell a hard truth? And how do you explain those lessons learned? And how do you sort of shape others? And so one of the 10, so in Tools of the Trade, 10 life lessons in leadership, which is where you reflected on how you were developed by CW4 Chuck Hunley. One of the lessons was never let them hear you yell. Don't let emotions get in the way of leading. And that is something that I know the reason I reached out to you was because you possess a very obvious spectrum that, I've discerned from your writing and what you publish. And I want to start with humor, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
So in this concept of not letting emotions get in the way of leading, but maybe ways that we can use our emotions to either like metabolize them, turn them into something productive, turn those into our superpower, be able to process them and let them go. I want to start with humor because you are very well known for your illustrations, your cartoon. And I think the last time I checked, you said you had over 20,000 followers for Doctrine Man.
Oh, God. When I closed Doctrine Man, we were sitting at about 300,000 followers, I think.
Did I just
somewhere in
say
that neighborhood?
Yeah. 300,000 through what venue? Through like where?
Well, it was a combination of Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Okay, and you have not taken these down, right? So I know that you stopped after 13
right.
years.
The cartoons will exist they're out there. They'll always be out there. And they're published too, so you can find them on Amazon too. There's compendiums. There's like 5 books of them out on Amazon too.
What was your inspiration to start Doctrine Man?
Anger.
Yes.
So I had come off an assignment of where I dealt with one of those people constantly who was excessively risk averse, couldn't make decisions in the moment, just struggled with a lot of the basic expectations of leadership that we have. And when I finally stepped away, it was, and then historically I'm a writer. So I've been writing for as long as I was in the Army, writing and publishing. But I knew inherently that I wasn't ready to put pen to paper yet because the anger was too strong. So what I did was I started to use cartooning as a channel to vent some of that anger and some of that frustration, and then use it as a vehicle for humor, right? So take the anger and frustration of the things that we deal with on an everyday basis. And it could be something as simple as, hey, everybody has to wear a reflective belt when we run. Why? So you don't get hit by cars. I mean, that's what road guards are for, so we don't get hit by cars. So why am I wearing a reflective belt? Well, because they said so. Like, give me a break. And so those kinds of things, like the person who shows up at your desk at the end of the duty day and says, oh man, I forgot to give you this, Susie. Can you have this done by tomorrow morning? And you realize it's like, you want me to write a 1,000-page white paper by morning? Yeah, I got to have it early because the commandant needs it. Like, you're killing me. So all those kinds of things then become funneled, or I funnel them through a filter of humor, and then they come out the other end, and people can relate to them because they're like, I know that, I've been down that road before. Got it. Haha, I know that guy. And that fueled Doctrine Man for a long time until I wasn't angry anymore. And then, the anger's still there a little bit, but it's like that was cathartic in the release.
Yeah.
That's my big word for the day is, that release of all that was so healthy. Then I could return to doing more writing, which I've done for, 5-6 years now for the weekly column. And those that I can put a more positive spin on my writing than I could have a decade earlier when really I just wanted to choke somebody out. But it also allows you to think through how you deal with that anger. Because I think any of us who have served for any period of time, or God knows anybody who's been deployed downrange for any period of time, you bring something back, and it's not always healthy. And when I retired, I went through the whole process of, hey, look, I think I might have a little PTSD, and okay, let's talk this out. And why do you think you have PTSD? Well, I'm angry all the time. So I was like Bruce Banner in that scene from Avengers when Captain America tells him, hey, it would be good for you to get angry, and he turns around and says, that's my secret, I'm always angry. And it's like, hey, but it's so, at the end of the day, I learned how to take that anger and refocus it and then channel it in a productive way, which is really a good, healthy thing to do. Because if you sit down and you're angry, it's like start writing until the anger abates. Get it out of your system, and then look at what you're saying and the message that you're putting out, so you don't come out like, that person who's always beating his chest about how angry he is about everything around him. Look at your message and how do I use this in a productive way that others can learn and grow and relate to. It's okay to be angry, but yet that gets to that message from Chuck Hunley. Don't let people hear you yell. Because as soon as you lose your temper and you're constantly yelling, whether you're yelling in your written word or in some other way, or just doing it verbally, that signals that you've lost control. Yeah. And his thing was, no matter how angry you are, never let people around you hear you yell, because it's not productive. It's not constructive. It doesn't achieve what you want to achieve. And you're going to end up having to mend all the fences that you burn by getting emotional like that. It's okay to be angry. Don't let your emotions do things that for you that, don't let your emotions write checks that you can't cash. Sure. And it's really interesting because the caveat to this is years later when I was working for Bob Caslin, who was the CAT commander at Fort Leavenworth, he used to say something when he would see people start to get emotional about something, and he would stop and he would say, facts, not emotions. Facts. And then, like, okay, leave your tears behind, leave your anger behind. If you're so emotionally connected to the issue, then you need to step back before you talk about it. It's not passion at all. Yeah. Passion is one thing. If you're excited about something, that's okay. But if it brings out the wrong emotions, then it's not healthy. It's not productive. Those two lessons on either end of the spectrum funnel what I try to do. And what I think is a fundamental lesson that we need to all follow is that, instead of emotions, let's focus on the facts. Let's focus on the data. What are the things that you can prove? And so when you get into discourse, like I think you mentioned something about this with the Harding Project, is that we can agree to disagree with one another, but let's not make it emotional. Let's argue facts. Let's argue data. Let's argue what we can prove, what the research shows. Nothing bothers me more than when you get somebody who starts a debate with, well, I feel like, tell me what you can prove. Tell me what you know. What's the ground truth here? Don't tell me how you feel. Don't tell me what you think. first of all, let's lay the facts on the table. Let's consider those facts. And then you can say, well, I feel like the facts are saying this, or I think the facts are saying this. That's okay. Don't lead with your feelings, because that's not useful. That's not helpful. Well, I took that down a rabbit hole, didn't I?
No, I love that you did. I have a really complex relationship with my anger, and I really believe that anger is useful as a precursor to thought. Like I really believe in my own anger. And in 2017, I took a knee for 6 months. I went through PTSD therapy because I was like marinating in anger, and it just wasn't sustainable for me. Nor is it sort of my natural state. So there was a solid indication that I had some work to do. So in 2017, I go through PTSD therapy, and my use of humor is that the way that I describe my outcomes from PTSD therapy is I say, oh, it worked too good. Like PTSD therapy worked too good on me. Now I'm never angry. And for a long time, I really avoided these emotions that had previously led me to acting in a way or thinking in a way that then led me to feeling shame. And so I got very small in my leadership. I got very small in my social sphere. I got very small in my influence. And it kind of everything in my life revolved around like avoidance of these emotions that had led me to shame. And I had this incredible moment with my best friend, who is not military in the least. And she came to visit me when I was living in DC, and she was like, hey, like, I believe in you so much, and you've gotten so small, like post therapy. And so it's like I developed a new avoidance, right? So before I was trying to avoid my trauma. And so I kept it, I really fueled it by, seeking that avoidance that I couldn't achieve. And then after PTSD therapy, when I had a chance to kind of make sense of some of that trauma and like let go of some of that trauma and turn it into healthier thoughts and behaviors, I was avoiding anger because I was avoiding shame. And so now as I sort of continue to grow and develop and mature as a leader, I believe that like my anger is such a necessary emotion as a precursor. So not as an end state, but as a precursor to responsible thought, because Steve, has never been more motivated to research, to read, to accumulate data, to formulate a thesis, to put pen to paper as when I was livid. I have never been so fuel. It's like jet fuel, for work products. But I think ultimately where the necessity is like fear, or like I should say anger. Anger in and of itself does not necessarily possess merit. And I think merit is necessary for professional discourse, number one. And how do we transform that thing? And so for me, a helpful tool, and you mentioned the Harding Project, which is something I just so strongly believe in, and their mission is to revitalize professional journals. Really, ultimately, in very plain language, their mission is to get soldiers to read more and to write more so we can develop these ideas that we share with one another to increase our lethality or increase our survivability so we can win in the next war. Like, how do we protect each other and insulate each other and develop our force? And they think, the precursor is like, can we do that through reading and writing? So I was working on this project when I found your article about your anger and how you've not only transformed it into humor, which folks love, people love, and has had such an impact so far beyond you, like you as a leader, but like now has become sort of like a cultural installation. But I think writing with anger is good, and revising with a connection to our ultimate power, which is not controlling others or belittling others or like putting somebody in their place, but really like the power that we hold as leaders is to fulfill a responsibility to others, to act in service to others. And what you discussed with Mr. Hunley, and we'll assume, I don't know him, maybe he had some anger. He used that anger to develop you so that risk, right, was something that in the culture of the unit was more likely for everybody to engage with responsibly, like in a healthy manner. And I think that if we keep focusing on like, what is our power, and it's not to control others, but to prepare others, to make it so we get this barrier out of the way, we get an obstacle out of the way, we can go down to AutoZone and buy parts without fear, so we can fulfill the mission, which is ultimately, isn't that what we're all supposed to be doing anyway?
Yeah. And I think, you hit on something really important there, and you may not have seen this post, but I saw there was an Army Times article a couple of days ago, and it was talking about Skill Bridge, and that they had a quote from a captain who said, "Well, the minute a soldier comes to me and says that they wanted to access Skill Bridge and develop themselves, my first thought was, well, I got to work you really hard now. I got to get the most out of you before you leave service." And I'm like, that is the most wrong-headed approach, because we have an obligation to grow the next generation. Because there's going to be a day when you're no longer in uniform. So those who follow, you want them to, I hate to just draw on my favorite phrase, but you want them to be all they can be. And to do that means you have to invest in their growth and development, and help them to achieve their goals. And not everybody's going to have the same goals as you. And what are your goals, and why do you want to get out, and what can I do to help you get to that next place in life, whether you're in, whether you're out, whatever. As leaders, which we all inherently are, that's what we're supposed to do. Not stand in the way of somebody's goals, but help them achieve those goals or refine those goals, so they can achieve what they want to in life. That's your legacy, right? So when you're done and gone, if somebody says, "Hey, she was the one who convinced me that this was the right thing to do, and it has been life changing," and it's something that we go through a process where we get student feedback, and I look at that student feedback, and I know that I'm hitting the sweet spot with students when they say things like, "He changed my life."
Yeah.
Literally changed. And I'm like, "I had you in class for a semester. How did I change your life?" But they can articulate that clearly. And it wasn't about me, it was about them, which is also something that, you learn over time. It's, I'm invested in you. I want you to be successful. How can I help you be successful? And it's like you're there to provide guidance, to provide counsel, to provide wisdom, and to set people on that pathway. We talked about land navigation, teaching land navigation, people who always have to go back through land navigation. And I had commented that, hey, teaching land nav, it ain't that hard. It's a pretty simple process. But life is land navigation. So if somebody struggles at making their way through life, then it's our obligation to help them learn land navigation as it relates to life, and how you maneuver from point to point, how you shoot an azimuth, how you maneuver the obstacles of life, because obviously you're not going to go from one point directly to another in a land nav course. So how do you maneuver that course? That's life, right? Yeah. So you learn to read the terrain. So it's the terrain around you is the people around you, the circumstances around you. How do you navigate that? How do you get from point to point? And what I always tell my students is there's no one clear path from point A to point B. There's multiple paths. You choose those paths, but you keep focused on point B. And it's the same thing with land nav. I want you to get to point B, and this is when you'll know you got to point B. Life is the same way. It's like, how do you get to point B is your decision, but I'm going to help you get there. I'm going to help you figure out how to get there. And as leaders, that's our moral obligation, is growing that next generation. Have you ever heard, this is one of those things that used to get debated a lot, is when somebody would say, well, I look at my soldiers as my children. And then people would get all uptight and say, well, they're not kids. It's like, you missed the point.
Yeah.
How do you feel about your kids? I love my kids. Yeah, you love your kids. And that's what the meaning is. You want to feel the same genuine affection and care for those who work for you as you would your own family. And they are by default an extension of your family. So in the same way that you would want your own kids to be successful, you want those people who work for you to be successful. And so you invest in their success. That's how you lead a legacy. That's how you change lives. That's how you become successful. As we say it with parents, you're measured by the success of that next generation. Well, it's the same thing for us in uniform. Our success out of uniform is their success in uniforms.
I'm sitting here taking notes just because I feel like you possess such a breadth of knowledge, and honestly, you are definitely my first non-warrant this season, and it's so helpful. I feel like to hold these conversations rather than becoming an echo chamber, within our cohort. But it's so necessary to reach across institutions, reach across, cores, cohorts, etc., branches, to really sit down and say, leadership. This is a critical element of the life that we have chosen, which is a life of service. This is such a critical element. And what I wanted us to talk about today, and what we are talking about today, is really how emotions can inform our leadership, but how we have a responsibility to not let them get in the way of our leadership.
Yeah.
So I had written down that where we started was that you turned your anger into humor, which it ended up reaching over 300,000 people. You've turned your anger into writing, which develops new processes, new principles that help guide someone else around that obstacle or through that obstacle. You've turned your anger into developing the next generation so that they're more likely to be successful and feel supported by someone who, number one, could understand them, and number two, has been through this and has successfully traversed to the other side. And I really just think that is, when I talk about anger being anger not being the end state, but anger being sort of that concentrated white light, and with you as the prism, you've turned it into such an impactful, such a larger thing than the anger itself. And I think that's it's so unfashionable to say that you're angry. It's so unfashionable.
Think about that.
Thing, and then so much good can come from it.
Oh, exactly. That was the point of, I shared an article on LinkedIn that connected us, but it was about, the whole anger thing. And the article treated anger as if it was some kind of disease. I mean, you already hit on it. It's what you choose to do with the anger that decides the outcome. If you choose to let the anger make your decisions for you, bad things are going to happen. But if you choose to use that anger as fuel for something good, then it's different. And so what was the point of the article? You shouldn't exercise anger. I'm like, yeah, sure. Okay. I mean, I do my best running when I'm angry, and I'm 61 years old and I still run, and I run angry, and that is therapeutic time that allows me to think and, okay, how am I going to channel all this? Because the anger itself isn't necessarily going to go away, but it does get transformed into something that can be then used productively. If I don't exercise, then that doesn't happen. And I have described to people, I'll go out and mow the lawn when I'm really pissed off, whether the lawn needs it or not. And people joke that you have a lawn that looks like a national park. Well, let me tell you what, it gets mowed a lot, but it's all positive, and it's the anger itself isn't going to go away. So don't hide from it. Don't try to tamp it down. Let that anger become fuel. Let that anger become something else. But, if you just try to tamp it down or hold it in, and you probably saw this too, when we go through the therapy sessions and we talk about that, you can't tamp that stuff down. You got to deal with it. And so how you deal with it, it's not going to go away. So you might as well go for a run. You might as well mow your lawn. You might as well draw cartoons or write or do something, but take it and channel it into something else. So that is more therapeutic than, I'm all for going to goat yoga, but that ain't gonna cut it. I don't have mild anger. I have intense anger, and it's not going to come out playing with a goat.
I appreciate the candid discussion, and I know I've said this before, but sometimes even discussing anger is considered to be unwise, right? It's a brainstem activity. It's not what leaders do, and we try to package things and use our 25-cent words to obfuscate this emotion rather than kind of uncover it and transform it. And so I really appreciate that, just a candid discussion on your experience with anger, your ongoing experience with anger. And again, coming back to really that mentorship that you received early in your career, is that like an inappropriate way would be to yell, right? So going back to Mr. Hunley's quote, never let him hear you yell, and then your interpretation that emotions were getting in the way of leading. I really advocate for, especially in warrant officership, where's that pressure to accumulate wisdom, is that if we can get these things out of our way by like really sitting down, metabolizing, transforming, and extending them through our power, like the superpower, I think that that's just such an important way ahead, so that we can be an honest broker, not an angry broker, so that we can tell hard truths, not unkind truths, but hard truths that propel us forward in our mission and in, our modernization, which is just an act of self-preservation. It's just an act of like our own evolution as a military force and as a sort of a subset of society. Thank you so much. I'm going to make sure that I add, you talked about a couple of articles, and I'm going to add some of the links to your cartoons so folks can kind of check out the work that you have created and that you've sort of gifted to the military and to the world, and also maybe draw some of their own ideas with that inspiration of how they can get these emotional barriers out of their way for being really healthy, good leaders.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that you just embrace the emotion. I may not wear it on my sleeve, and I certainly won't let it come out very often. But I mean, it's there, so it's just how you deal with it in a healthy, productive way.
Yeah.
I think my whole career I yelled twice, and both times I regretted it afterwards.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't helpful, it wasn't productive. I was yelling at somebody, and it's like that's just in both cases, the person on the other end got a Feel Great Article 15 at the end of the result.
Oh.
But I felt like I lost control of the situation in both cases. And it's like, that's not what I want to do. It's not who I want to be.
Yeah.
And it's people have a greater respect, I think, for you if you maintain control of your emotions. Okay. Even if you're upset, it's okay. But just don't let them make decisions for you. And, it just never ends well that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I was talking to Sergeant First Class Summerlin. Again, it's just multiple injects. All roads lead back to the Harding Project. But talking to Sergeant First Class Leighton Summerlin, one of the things that we have discussed is the way that we receive new soldiers and the way that we communicate with them. Are those methods indicative of and like reinforcing of our shared values? And so he has some really bold ideas, and he is an excellent writer, the perfect person to have identified, as part of to lead the Harding Project with Major, I guess now Lieutenant Colonel Zachary Griffiths, but such an incredible thinker and writer. And I rely on him in the Harding Project working groups for me to be like, I'm angry. Are you angry? And he's like, yes. But what comes out of it for him is like really reflections on our values and these processes of communicating. And even in the first time you receive a soldier, I guess it's like a civilian at that point, a civilian who wants to be a soldier. Like, what do you model for them? How are we doing things? And how can we continue to improve these processes? Which I think is really cool.
From the first announcement of the Harding Project, I thought this has been something that's long overdue. I have been a firm believer in doing something like this for a long time. I have always been a proponent of people writing professionally to further the profession of arms, to grow who we are as an institution. The challenge has always been a lot of people don't write, and people who don't write don't foster this kind of thinking. And so it was something that coming from the chief couldn't have been any better. When the chief says, hey, this is what we're going to do, guess what? Everybody gets in line and does it. And at that point, if you're telling your subordinates don't bother writing, well, then you're operating in contradiction to the chief's guidance. The power of putting the chief of staff of the Army behind this is something that I would have never thought possible. And it's just awesome. And the outcome of this is going to go nowhere but into goodness. And I think as a profession, we're going to grow from this. And we're going to share a lot more lessons than we would have done otherwise.
Thank you so much for all of your time. I really do appreciate all of your insights. And I hope that today, I think you said you're working on your book today?
Yeah, I'm working on a book on strategy and logistics with one of my old writing partners. And today is my chapter writing day. I'm writing a chapter about the art of logistics and looking at it through the lens of the great captains of battle.
That's incredible.
I'm not angry, so I need to go get angry.
I know. I know. You want to maybe exchange some insults before we get off the phone?
If you have any questions or feedback on what you want to hear more of this season, please email warrant.officer.history@gmail.com. And as always, for updates and information, please visit the Warrant Officer Historical Foundation at warrantofficerhistory.org. I do want to mention that the announcement of the fiscal year 2025 Warrant Officer Historical Foundation Non-Resident Fellowship has been posted. So if you would like to be the next host of the Cohort W podcast, please get a hold of Dr. Russell Hauser for any information. He has listed the eligibility criteria, the timelines, and the application directions. So again, reach out to Dr. Russell Hauser at the Warrant Officer Historical Foundation, and you could be the next Cohort W host. As always, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.